Ladies and gentlemen, my name is EK and welcome back. Thank you for once again joining me on my channel. Before we start, let me talk a bit about the face cam. I usually don't really do face cam for this kind of stuff, but since I have already shown all the footage that you see in the background on my actual benchmark videos, I felt like I was just recycling content and I wanted to add in something, so here's my face. If you don't like seeing my face, then just ignore it, or just like put me a second monitor or something, or minimize the video and just listen to the audio, because the footage of my face doesn't really matter, but it's there. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is my newest purchase. You have seen some videos go up on the channel. This is going to be a rather rambly video, by the way. I did not write a script. This is just going to be me talking out of my ass for however long I feel like talking out of my ass for. It's about my recent purchase of the Ryzen 5800X3D, and more specifically my thoughts on the CPU when using it with Guild Wars 2. So originally the reason I purchased this specific CPU is because two reasons actually. First of all, in my specific case, I had a Ryzen 2700X or an X470 motherboard, and the AM4 platforms, the platform that both the 2700X and the 5000 series are on, is being discontinued, or at least development probably won't proceed too much more. We might see, they have mentioned some stuff that we might see a couple more chips come to the platform, but I wouldn't expect any massive performance leaps to really come anymore. I'm expecting this to be like the final proper chip with maybe like some slight upgrades on the path, and then we have the AM5 platform. So I did not want to upgrade my entire system. I wanted to upgrade a little bit. So if you are on a Ryzen platform right now, if you have a 1000, 2000, 3000, or even a 5000 series, you could make the upgrade, provided your motherboard supports or has a BIOS update available to it that supports the new CPU. You can just Google your motherboard and you can see if it has a BIOS update specifically for this CPU. My BIOS specifically needed an upgrade for this exact CPU. So just a heads up, keep in mind that you want to check that, because otherwise you buy it, it won't work, and you're going to be sad. And, you being sad doesn't do me any good, so please don't be sad. So that's one reason. The other reason why I went for this specific CPU is because this specific CPU is extremely good when it comes to older engines. The problem with these older engines is that they weren't built to properly render a lot of different character models on the screen at the same time. So you have noticed it if you've played Guild Wars 2, you're playing solo, it's perfectly fine. You have 100, 150, 200, 250 FPS maybe even. And then you have your character model set at a rather high setting, like anywhere between medium and highest. You go to the Quarrel or any other like world boss or a big event, and all of a sudden you see FPS that is sub 30, sub 20, or if you're running a bit of an older CPU, potentially even sub 10. Now, single digit FPS is it's bad. I can't handle it. It's really bad. Sub 30 is already like I can't. But the reason why this specific CPU is very good is because it has more L3 cache. And L3 cache, without going into any technical detail, partially because I don't have all the knowledge regarding the CPU architecture, but also because I don't want to bore you guys with all of that stuff. What it does is it allows more character models to be rendered more easily. So what they did is they downscaled the clock speed. So usually this game, or any game that runs on a single core, really works very well on a very high clock speed, because higher clock speed is good for a single core performance. And since most of these games are not necessarily only on one core, but they very heavily rely on one fast core to do most of the heavy lifting. So what they actually did was they downclocked the CPU, which is a bit weird because that's usually what makes it run better in these types of games. But then they added more cache, and I'm assuming they had to downscale the clock speed to add the cache, because otherwise it wouldn't work like power-wise or heat-wise, or there's probably some constraint within which they had to work, so they had to remove something to add something else elsewhere. And I have to say that first, when I heard about the idea, I was like, not sure how good this is going to work, because I feel like Guild Wars 2 really likes its clock speed. But I have to be very honest with you guys. I have picked up the CPU about a week ago. I've had it running for a couple days now. I've done a lot of tests. I've done World v World. I've done Fractals. I've done Dungeons. I've done pretty much any kind of content you can imagine. And the performance has been really good. I mean, you're seeing it in the background right now. I probably have some Quarrel or World v World or a Fractal Run or something going on in the background currently. I have no idea yet. I'll do the editing later. But the thing you'll be seeing is that when the character models are between lowest and medium, the performance doesn't drop under 60, like a lot. Usually, if I remember correctly, if I'm playing on my 2700X and I go into, well, World v World, for example, and the World v World video wasn't extremely populated, but the Quarrel was. And if I go to that Quarrel map, for example, and I have my settings at medium or high or highest, I will be destroying my FPS. My FPS will be plummeting towards like the 20 to 15-ish. It will be really bad. But also the highest numbers were definitely not anywhere near where they are right now. So what does the CPU do for you? Because you might be asking yourself, yeah, it's like, you know, you're talking out of your ass for like, I don't know, 5 minutes already. You haven't really said anything about what it does for you. So what does it do for me? Well, it does give me more max FPS. That's just because I am jumping from a mid-range 2000 series to a top-end 5000 series. So obviously it's going to give me some more maximum FPS, but that's not really what I bought it for. Also, I noticed that Guild Wars 2 apparently has a 250 FPS cap for some reason. Might be like an engine thing, but it doesn't push past 250 FPS. If anyone can actually tell me why, by the way, I'm kind of curious. So if anyone can tell me why, I haven't Googled it, so maybe it's on Google, but if anyone knows why, please let me know. I'm kind of interested. But yeah, it pushes a lot more frames. Now, usually it doesn't really matter too much. Most people are still working with 60, 100, 144, 165 Hz monitors. There are some 200 plus monitors out there, but generally that's not really what you're looking for in a game like Guild Wars 2. Anything like 100 plus is generally, you know, very smooth. I have a 100 Hz monitor myself, so I currently don't need anything over 100, but it's nice to see that I can push like 220, 230, 240 in instance content, so I don't have to worry about any drops. Because, you know, if it drops to 180, I'm not going to notice it. I'm only going to notice it when it drops under 100, which it doesn't. So I have a perfect 100 FPS. I turn on VSync to make sure it, you know, it's just a nice stable FPS. But knowing that I have such headroom is quite nice. But that headroom is not what I bought the CPU for. I bought the CPU for my minimum FPS, and even more important, my FPS stability. So, we've all been there. First of all, let's talk about the minimum FPS part. So, I've been playing a lot of these big events because I wanted to see how the CPU performed. And my minimum FPS seems to be quite a lot higher. When I'm pushing lowest, low, medium, and to a lesser extent high character models and character limit, the performance is actually very good. Now, if I turn it up all the way to highest and I'm loading, you know, so many things into the rendering engine and, you know, it's trying to keep up, yeah, at some point I think the performance is going to be pretty bad, and it might be even quite similar to the performance I had on my old CPU, which I think is just simply a lack of engine performance, because there's just it just can't utilize all that's on the CPU. So let's exclude highest for a moment, because why would you ever play on highest? Why? Tell me. If you play on highest, why? Anyway, continuing on with high is also kind of like, I generally don't play on high. I play on medium and below. So let's be a normal person here, guys. Let's be a normal person and let's talk about medium, because I think medium is the highest character model setting you should ever use, unless there's a very specific reason why you want highest. Like maybe in World v World you want to be able to see the models for some reason. Like, I guess I can see it. I mean, I don't play World v World too much, so, you know, I might be missing something there. But generally, medium is the highest I would go for. Medium will show a lot of people. So if you're in a squad, like, you know, a 150-man squad, it was going to show a lot of people there. You can still just activate all nameplates, so you can still see where everyone else. You just don't see their actual models running around, which works quite well. So if you're on medium, the performance is much better than on my 2700X. On medium, I'm having trouble even getting under 60, and in a lot of cases, I'm keeping a 100 plus FPS on medium. Now, you can see my Quarrel video. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I can't remember on top of my head, but I think it's dropping under 80, maybe even under 60 sometimes. I can't remember exactly, but the performance should be a lot better. So if you compare it to yourself, I think the best thing to do here is to just run, my settings and see how your performance is. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is I'm running an ultra monitor. I'm running it on 3440 by 1440, so 1440p in ultra wide aspect ratio. And what's happening here is I have a wider screen, so there's potential that I'm rendering more character models in highest because I have more screen width. So I see more, so there might be more models being rendered because those would otherwise be cut off by the edges of your screen. So I'm not sure exactly how that works. Like, does it render anything off screen? Maybe, I don't know. I don't think so, because when I send the camera away, the FPS goes up. So I'm thinking it only renders what's exactly like in frame. So I'm thinking that's how it works. So if that's the case, then yeah, there might be a bit of a difference there. But you can like walk away a little bit, look from like a bigger distance. And I'm rambling again, but I told you at the start, this is going to be a rambly one. I warned you. I did. So if we're talking about medium here, I want you to go out and compare to your CPU. If you're looking for an upgrade, like if you're watching this video and you're not looking into an upgrade and you just want to see me ramble about something, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's great to hear. But if you're here for the cause of wanting an upgrade potentially, which I'm assuming you are, also sorry for being this long-winded, but once again, I warned you. So if you're here for an upgrade, then I think the best thing to do here would be to use my exact settings, go and recreate the situation as best you can, and see what the performance difference is like. See, not necessarily the max FPS. I don't think the max FPS should matter too much, but look at the minimum FPS and more specifically look at the stability of the FPS. That brings me to the second part, because minimum FPS, it's gonna plummet down very harsh anyway at some point. It's gonna happen. It's just the way the game works. Sorry guys, but that's just the way it is. But stability is very important. So we've all been there. We're playing Guild Wars 2 and we are having quite some people on the screen. The FPS is like a nice stable like 30, 40, 50, which in and of itself wouldn't be too bad. Like, I don't like it, but I can play a game at locked 30 FPS as long as it's actually locked. I'm gonna go on a very small side tangent here, but I played Breath of the Wild for a little bit, and during the first area it was stuttering back into the low 20s. Initially I thought, well, am I being crazy here? Like, is this game that's super popular and apparently like one of the best games ever made according to a lot of people, is that game laggy? Went to Digital Foundry. They told me it was laggy. They showed me it was actually dropping frames where I said it was dropping frames. So I seem to be extremely sensitive to dropping frames because none of my friends actually, well, believe me would be a bit of a weird word, but everyone was like, dude, why are you being such a bitch about it? It's just, just play the game. Like, who cares about a couple of FPS drops? Which, fair point to them. I'm jealous. If they can play a game and not have that constant nagging feeling when the FPS drops, then nice. I have that problem. So I'm extremely susceptible to FPS drops, which is why this is the main selling point to me, which is only taking me like 15 minutes to get to. Only 15 minutes, guys. Like, we're flying through the non-existing script. So, excuse me. So, what happened here is my stability improved a lot. A lot. Quite often, you're looking around and like you see like these little dips. Like the FPS, if you look at the average FPS, it'd be like 30, 29, 30, 29. Like the average FPS wouldn't deviate too much because it's taking averages, like, shots upwards and shots downwards. They're all being, compensated by each other in the average. So the average line seems to be pretty good. Like it seems to be quite stable. But then when you look at the actual FPS graph, like the frame times as well, which is why I included the actual FPS graph in the video. I'm hoping you guys were able to see it. It was a little bit small, but I didn't want to fill the entire screen with stats, so that's why. Yeah, one thing you can see there is there's these little blips up and down. And my most important request for this CPU was that those blips up and down were more consistent. So it's totally fine if it's dropping like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Like if it goes up and down a little bit, like that's fine. Those FPSs, wow, frames per second or something like that. If those are within like a very small singular digit range, yeah, you might feel it, but it's not too bad. But if it's like 23, 39, 21, 48, like if it just keeps jumping up and down like that, yeah, on average it might be 30, but the actual feeling of that FPS is more like 20. Like, yeah, some of the high FPS points in time might be like 79 or 10 less than that. That'd be nice. So I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Anyway, so it's all about that stability there, and this CPU has really provided that stability a lot to me. I've been messing around with a lot of like, I was trying in the video as well. I was trying to like shake the screen around and see if shaking the screen around could like cause some FPS fluctuations. And yeah, they were there. I mean, the engine is still not perfect, and obviously my hardware isn't perfect, but the stability was extremely good. And it's actually managing to push my my GPU to its max in some areas, which means that in some areas my GPU is actually what's holding me back, which is a good feeling. Well, it's partially a good feeling. I mean, I have a 1080 Ti that I bought in March of 2017, so it's worked for over 5 years now. I'm very happy with the card. Getting an upgrade seems very tempting, but the prices don't really support my temptations just yet, so maybe like in a year or 4080 Ti, hello. But yeah, it's a good feeling seeing my GPU being maxed out, which means the CPU isn't the bottleneck. So I feel like I should start winding down this video, because I could talk about so much more, just like random stuff that I could talk about. But the message I want to bring across here is that the thing, if you're looking for an upgrade here, the thing you should not be looking for is more FPS max. Like if you're looking for the highest possible max FPS, you're probably better getting like a 5800X or maybe like a 12900K or KF, which I think doesn't have this GPU if I remember correctly. So like, an Intel chip would be great here, or like, something with a higher clock speed. But if you're after that, then you're playing the wrong game. Because what you want in Guild Wars is you want to have some level of frame stability, and you want to have minimal FPS being as high as possible, which is definitely, I can 100% confirm that this CPU currently is the single best AMD CPU in the market for this game. And I'm quite confident in saying that it's the single best Guild Wars 2 CPU in the market. I don't think Intel can compete, because as far as I've seen in the benchmarks, their averages and their stability are still lower because they don't have the V cache or the 3D cache to really compensate for the. Well, I mean, they have a slightly higher clock speed, but that's not going to like compensate for the V cache that the AMD CPU has. So let's talk a little bit, before I wind down this video, let's talk a little bit about when you should be upgrading. So if you have a 1000, 2000, or 3000 CPU, I'm confidently able to recommend upgrading here. I had a 2700X, which is, well, for Guild Wars 2 purposes, a very fast CPU within the 2000 series. And I had a massive improvement. It was, I didn't put the old one back in, because that would be too much work, and I don't like doing work. But I can tell you for sure, if I put the old one back in and I played the same content now that I'm used to higher FPS, I would be hating my life. It's a big upgrade. I was able to tell immediate differences. My max FPS like doubled, which isn't what I'm looking for, but it's nice to see. So that is great. And well, if you're on 1000 CPU, then the difference will be even bigger. So definitely go for it. Once again, remember to check if your motherboard supports it, because otherwise you're buying a CPU that doesn't work on your motherboard, and then you're gonna be sad. Don't be sad. Be smart. 3000 CPU. I did some testing with a friend of mine who has... Actually, he has a 5000 series. Never mind. For a second, in my mind, I thought he had a 3000. It's not true. I don't know what's wrong with me, guys. So, if you have a 3000 CPU, same as with the 2000 series, go upgrade. Yeah, the jump is going to be smaller, but it's still going to be noticeable. Your max FPS probably won't increase too much, but the stability increase is definitely still there. Now, the main question I see people asking is, well, what if I have a 5000 series CPU? What if I have a 5800X, as I was asked earlier today? Or what if I have a like 5950X, which in theory is a much better CPU for overall purposes? Well, and that's where it becomes kind of tricky. If you have anything under 5000, upgrade. Go for it. It's a good call. If you have the money, if you have the motherboard, and you want to get the best performance possible, get it. If you have a 5000 series CPU though, if you have a 5800X for example, then the difference is going to be smaller. Your max FPS might actually drop a little bit because there's less clock speed available to it, and it's the same architecture, so I'm assuming max FPS is going to be higher on the 5800X as opposed to the 5800X3D, because it's the same chip. It's just lower clock speeds, more L3 cache, which works well for those stability and minimum FPS purposes. If you just play games, if you just play Guild Wars 2, if you just want to have more stability here and you don't care about losing potentially like a couple, like 10, 20 FPS on the top of it, then go for it. But keep in mind, the difference is going to be smaller. It's still going to be worth it. Just make sure you test it in comparison to my benchmarks and see if it actually looks solid. But if you want the stability there, if you want the minimum FPS there, it's still going to be worth it. The one thing that I think is very hard to say, so that's a 5800X. But let's say you have a 5950X, which is the most expensive CPU on the AM4 platform, which is the, I think it's 16 core, 32 threads, and it has a clock speed that is, I think, slightly higher than the 5800X3D. So what you'll be doing then is you will be giving up half your cores, because the 5800X3D only has 8 cores. So you'll be giving up half your cores, but those cores would be better at running Guild Wars 2 most likely, because I don't think, I mean, Guild Wars 2 doesn't even take advantage of my 8x16 CPU. It definitely isn't taking advantage of a 16x32 CPU. So I'm thinking that the performance is probably quite similar on both CPUs. If we compare like 5800X and 5950X, which I might even favor like the 5800X because I think it has a higher clock speed. But if you have a 5950X currently and you want to upgrade to, well, upgrade, it's more like a side grade to the 5800X3D, you can. In gaming performance, it's still going to be better. But do keep in mind, guys, you are giving up a lot of performance outside of gaming. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple of years games develop more and more and more. We have the Unreal Engine 5 now. I'm assuming it's going to be better. I haven't really looked into this, but I'm assuming it's going to be better in performing with multi-core CPU setups, so like 6, 8, 12, 16. Like they might become more common and they might be better supported, which means that your 5950X might be better in the long run. But for now, it's very hard to say. But if you just want to play Guild Wars 2 or Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, like any like older MMO that really just relies on that like horsepower of a single core, but also has a lot of benefit with the added Vcache, it's still worth it. It's going to be a big amount of money for a mediocre reward. It's going to be noticeable, but not very. And you're giving up a better CPU overall. It's up to you, man. If you like Guild Wars 2, I can see it being worth it. If you play other things, or if you're a content creator, if you're doing like rendering or streaming or anything, I can't recommend it. I think just stick with the 5950X at that point, or whatever else you have. So that is, wow, 26 minutes, guys. I did not write a script for this. Like I mentioned, I still have more to say if I wanted to, but I'm gonna cut it here. I need to end this video at some point. I still have to go to the gym, and if I don't end the video now, then I'm gonna be stuck here for another like 3 hours just talking to myself. So, if anyone made it to the end of this video, guys, I did notice the other day that only about 5% of my viewers are subscribed, which, after recording this video, makes perfect sense to me. I would not subscribe to this either. Who the hell is this guy just rambling here? But if you made it to this point of the video, then you're crazy. And that means that you might want to subscribe to this channel. So please, hit that sub button. It'd be nice to see some numbers go up. This is the perfect video to ask for subs, by the way. The perfect video. Because if you sat through this video, dude, you're gonna love my content. I'm right up your alley. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for watching this one. If you made it here. If you made it here, please let me know. Please let me know, okay? Please. Have a nice day, guys. I'll see you around.